Hello and welcome to my video tutorials. Today we're looking at sexual reproduction in plants. Sexual reproduction is a process of the fusion of the nuclei of male and female gametes, resulting in the production of offspring that are genetically different. Advantages of sexual reproduction include the following. Genetically different species are produced which will result in variation. There are increased chances of species survival due to genetic variation. Diseases will not usually affect and wipe out all species since they are genetically different. Disadvantages of sexual reproduction, however, include that for fertilization to occur, two parents, that is, the male and the female parent, are needed. This means that an isolated individual cannot reproduce. Lastly, time and energy is needed to find a mating partner. Of course, that you can relate when it comes to animals, more especially human beings. The structure and functions of parts of a dicotyledonous flower, as you can see them, we have the stigma, we have the style, and then we have the ovary, and inside the ovary, there are ovules, and then that makes the female part of the flower, which we call the pistil. And then we have anther and filament. Inside the anther, there are pollen grains, and then that forms the male part of the flower, which we call the stamen. And then we also have the sepal, we have the stalk, and then we have the petals of the flower here. These are the petals of the flower. And then we want to look at the functions of the structures. The sepals will protect the unopened flower. Even if the flower is opened, that the sepals are going to support it, they are going to shield it. And then we look at the petals. These may be brightly colored to attract insects, as you can see in this representation here, that the petals are brightly colored. This is to attract insects most of the time. And then we have the stamens. The stamens are the main parts of the flower, as I have earlier on said, that each consists of an anther held up on a filament, and then inside the anther there are the male gametes, which we call pollen grains. And then the stigma, the top of the female part of the flower, which collects pollen grains. So the stigma is the top of the female part of the flower, and this one is functional in collecting pollen grains from the anthers. So when the anthers want to deposit their pollen for fertilization, this is where they deposit them. And then we have the ovary, which produces the female sex cells, which are contained in the ovules. So we have the ovary here. The ovary produces and encloses what we call ovules, which are the eggs, so to say, of the flower. And then down the flower we have got a structure which we call a nectary, which produces a sugary solution called nectar. That one too is functional in attracting insects into the flower. You have the nectaries here, they're going to produce the sugary substance which you call nectar, so that these insects that will pollinate the flower will come by, and in the process of collecting their nectar they do pollinate the flower. I have just touched there pollination, which is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. For pollination to occur, we require pollination agents, which are listed as wind, insects, water, and flowers sometimes do self-pollinate. And then we have types of pollination. We have self-pollination, which is the pollination of a flower by pollen grains from the same flower or from another flower, but on the same plant. And then we also have cross-pollination, which is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower on a different plant of the same species, though. In self-pollination, the pollination occurs within the same plant, flowers. However, in cross-pollination, the transfer is from a different flower from a different plant, but the plant must be of the same species. We have implications of self-pollination, which include that there is inbreeding depression leading to reduced health of the plant species. However, with cross-pollination, there is a greater genetic variation and a high chance of survival and success of species, as the pollination that occurs is from different plants, but remember, same species. Structural differences between insect and wind pollinated flowers. You are going to notice that wind pollinated flowers are dull and they are less attractive. However, insect pollinated flowers will usually be brightly colored and they are attractive, of course, to attract the insects. Wind pollinated flowers will lack fragrance. However, insect pollinated flowers have a fragrance that is designed to attract the insects into the flower. Like we earlier on said that there are nectaries, and all those nectaries and the fragrances, they attract the insects into the flower. And then wind pollinated flowers will have pollen that are relatively lighter. However, pollen grains produced from insect pollinated flowers, though not lighter, but they have sticky surfaces so that they attach into the bodies of the insects that carry them. Wind pollinated flowers produce relatively a greater number of pollen grains because these are carried by wind, so there are many chances that they fall off and stuff, so they have to produce a large number. However, in insect pollinated, they just produce a limited number of pollen grains, since there is a greater chance that pollen fall off just right in the required place, which is the stigma of the flower.